All right, everybody, we are live. I am Jason Bermas. This is wearechange.org. And today, for our weekly wrap up, Luke is in Mexico, but we are lucky enough to be joined by Dan Dix of Press for Truth. He does an amazing job over there. Really been in the game almost a decade, actually 2008, maybe a little over a decade at this point. And he has been a fearless journalist, not only in Canada, but abroad. And today, I want to go over probably one of the biggest stories. The memo has been released. We're going to be talking about some other things as well, but the memo has been released. And I think that me and Dan may have a bit of a difference of opinion on this one. Now, the memo itself, the Democrats are claiming it's unshocking. The Republicans are saying it's the worst thing ever. And I think that the truth actually does lie somewhere in the middle. My belief is, there is an arm that does not want Trump in. I think this was obvious. I think anybody paying attention knew that he was being surveilled. And at the same time, you can't tell me that he doesn't go along the lines of globalism and really military aggression abroad. His foreign policy has not changed at all, and in my opinion, has become extremely dangerous and aggressive. But we'll get into that. Dan, what's your take on this memo?
To be honest, Jason, when I first heard about it, I immediately was reminded of the nonsense and ridiculousness with the Russian hacking meme personally. And I thought to myself, it's the Russian hacking meme, this dossier, the memo. To me, it's tantamount to almost like a limited hangout in a sense, where libertarians in my mind and anarchists and just the general masses in general are no longer thinking about this possibility that it's the deep state who brought in Donald Trump, but that he actually may have defeated the secret government and may have actually defeated the deep state and gotten in there despite their efforts. And to me, it's undoing the work that we've done for many years with exposing the false left-right paradigm and the fact that presidents are selected, in fact, instead of elected. So as I see this, it comes across to me as a bit of a distraction, to be honest, to try to get people back into that mentality of the fact that your vote actually counts for something.
Well, I would say this, Dan. I truly do believe that obviously the majority of our elections are C-elections. We've seen that time and time again. You look at George W. Bush versus, say, John Kerry, his second cousin, his Yale skull and bonesman, only 2 years apart. Now, before that, there did seem to be a small opposition with somebody like Howard Dean, but he was ripped in the media with his, and whether they actually rigged that primary for John Kerry, it's never really been investigated, but we knew there were all sorts of shenanigans going on with Diebold machines and other machines as well. Now, you go to a time before that, and you have Bill Clinton versus his father, George H.W. Bush, and you literally have somebody that's been implicated in smuggling cocaine through Mena, Arkansas, through the CIA, which that president had a huge connection to, as he was the head of the CIA. These guys are cronies. They hang out together. They seem to have this long-standing relationship. But when you go before that election and you have somebody like, say, Ronald Reagan versus George H.W. Bush, and Reagan talked his smack, and they talked back and forth. Reagan gets the nod. Well, David Rockefeller steps in and he rectifies that situation to the best of his ability. But when he's not able to, all of a sudden somebody gets shot by a Hinckley, a man who walks the streets today. So I think there is a complexity out there. I think there are candidates that are a little bit more favorable. And I obviously think that even on the Democratic side, as much of an issue I had with, say, a Bernie Sanders, my friend, he was obviously not the selection over somebody like Hillary Clinton, who is going to go along with the globalist cabal on every step of the way. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, no tax reform. I'll give credit where credit is due. That's my point. I think we're dealing in complex times. I think that his administration is littered with Goldman Sachs. And that's a huge problem. And we're going to get to one of his other associations, but I want to go over some of these things in this memo and get your reaction. Now, for instance, this FISC, not FISA, but FISC warrant was obtained on October 21st, 2016 on Carter Page, and this is when they were surveilling Trump Towers. Now, throughout this, they rely on, the PP dossier. And you notice that's a dossier, and this is a memo. The dossier. Some language politics there. The other thing I would say about this is not only do we have just a plethora of information that they, went with this FISA warrant 3 separate times. There's a 90-day cycle, so that means for at least 6 months they had this, what I believe to be illegal surveillance based on even citing a Yahoo article, which the source for it, Dan, guess who? Daniel Steele. So the source of the article and the dossier are the reasons for these renewals of warrants. And you look at the text message, you can see the bias. You look at somebody like Seymour Hersh, who is recorded, won't go on the record. He's as left as it gets. It doesn't get much more of a left-leaning mainstream journalist. And don't get me wrong, Seymour's done some very good work in the past. He's recorded as basically saying Seth Rich is the leaker, that the Russian hack plot is John Brennan and the deep state, although he doesn't like how Trump addresses him. And even he, Dan, will not address that phone call. And when he's asked about it, he says, I'm not going to comment on that. I live in the real world. Comments.
Yeah, it's just mind-boggling at this point, Jason, how much is being thrown into this to this. I keep referring to it as a meme because that's kind of what it's almost turned into. And like you said, you got the dossier, you got the memo. I mean, I really think it's adding to a great deal of confusion, and it's important because there are some bad things that go on here. There's things that do need to be exposed, but I think it preoccupies people with fighting and bickering over kind of the smaller things, and we gotta still look at the bigger picture. And going back to the first point about Donald Trump, I think we may both be potentially correct here in the sense that he may not be aware of the overall end game here, or the fact that he has been allowed this position. I would say it like this. I think, at this stage in the game of becoming president of the United States, the deep state would allow this to happen. Now, whether or not Trump is aware of that, I don't know. I'm not sure if he's in on this or if he's being used as a pawn to eventually be blamed for the dollar crash or something of that nature. But right now, it seems that this stuff is just a distraction to keep us thinking about the election, which is like over a year ago. Let's move forward here and try to have him not continue to be. I think I just read lately he's projected to be dropping more bombs than even Obama did, drone bombing. So let's focus on the future instead of the past. That's kind of where I'm at with it.
Well, I think that we're definitely talking about a complex issue. I mean, this was a guy who was unabashedly military when he ran. This is a guy that was unabashedly surveillance state, police state when he ran. He wants to prosecute Edward Snowden as a war criminal. These were huge factors when he was running for the presidency, and everybody wanted me to ride this Trump train. And I had to say, look, there's a lot of problems with this guy. There's even a lot of problems with somebody like a Rand Paul, who I thought was the best man at the podium. At least he was the one man standing up against the FISA memo. But do you notice that the media refuses to go after Trump on legitimate issues, such as the passing of that FISA memo, such as the bombing of Syria, such as the media blackout on what's going on in Syria and Iran? I mean, there's reports that the ex-Iranian president that was demonized for almost a decade as the man that was going to wipe Israel off the map, that he's been under arrest secretly. That should be a national news story. So I feel like, the military stuff really does scare me because silently we are going along the way. The smart bombs are dropping. The drones are continuing. The surveillance state is in full effect. The automation is on the way. There doesn't seem to be any difference in those policies. However, I do see a halt on things like NATO's power, on that type of globalism. As we saw with Brexit, the opposition to things like the European Union, Trump supporting that, Nigel Farage, these things. I think there are complexities, but again, this is a billionaire. This is a guy that brought us Atlantic City. This is a misogynist, in my opinion. I mean, he's unabashed. 3 different wives. I don't think there's anyone that's sane that's actually questioning the Stormy Daniels affair or the hundreds of other prostitutes that he probably used. This is a man that's an actor that's been very comfortable in front of a television screen for 30 plus years as part of popular culture. He's the first man to parlay that into the presidency without any other political office, by the way. He's not a dumb man. But as you said, would he realize he was being puppeteered? I don't think so. And you know what? That's why I want to get to this next story, because we can debate the memo. We already know about that, what we would probably consider as lower level corruption. But in my opinion, corruption that needs to be exposed so people can really see the strings of power that comparatively are much like, television shows like House of Cards. Let's be honest. That's about the most realistic, unfortunately, television show about that office and the White House out there. And that's still fiction. It's darker than that, folks. I promise you. But let's get to this. Trump's kind of bragged about his relationship with Henry Kissinger for some time. It's a long-standing one. He's almost been somewhat of an advisor to him. And now we have this story. This is the Daily Mail version. It's over at Zero Hedge. It's making its way around here. A nuclear strike of North Korea is tempting, says legendary U.S. diplomat, war criminal, Henry Kissinger, as Kim Jong-un warns Trump is pushing towards war. Dan?
Okay, so Kissinger and Trump, war with North Korea. Just a couple weeks ago, maybe it was 2-3 weeks ago, Rex Tillerson actually came to Vancouver, Canada, Vancouver, BC, to host a conference to discuss the issues of dealing with the North Korean nuclear threat. And I applied for accreditation to that plenty of in time in advance. And when I showed up to pick up my passes, wouldn't you know it, they wouldn't let me in, and I wasn't able to document any of this. But I paid attention to what was said, and it was the same kind of just fear-mongering and rhetoric, really, pushing people towards this boogeyman and the fear of a North Korean strike. But in the same breath, I mean, it was on that same little walking tour where he was talking about North Korea, where he just threw it in there that they were doing a 180 on Syria, not and the fact that they're going to stay in there, and the mission now is to oust Assad, which is a complete 180 from everything that Trump said. So basically, with Kissinger now announcing that this is what did he say in the article? This is a potential.
It's tempting.
What did he say?
It's tempting. For
tempting.
That
It's tempting. I mean, that just should go to show you how these guys are frothing at the mouths just to get ready to cause that next major calamity, that next major crisis, so that they can issue in that order out of the chaos, which is their modus operandi. So yes, Trump being buddied up with Kissinger and him being tempted to strike North Korea should be a big eye opener into some of the troubling things we're going to have to deal with moving forward with this administration.
Well, not only that, but this is where we kind of reconnected this summer, this June at Bilderberg 2012. Kissinger at the apex of that organization, there in its inception with his Lord Grandmaster David Rockefeller. I mean, these are facts. This is the truth. In fact, I don't know if you saw my story about the Rockefeller Rolodex, over 100,000 different people, over 200,000 different cards. And Kissinger is prominently in there. I think he has more cards than anyone, over 35. But in those cards, again and again, the Bilderberg meeting is of prominence. So is the Bohemian Grove when he met Ronald Reagan. When you see that card, guess what? He's got a card on Trump. And now, although those meetings aren't there, getting back to this Bilderberg 2017, it was littered, literally littered, not only with the Kissingers of the world, but the Peter Thiels of the world, who's Trump's technology advisor, with Liddell, who was his newly named advisor, with his other Goldman Sachs cronies. In fact, he had more people in his administration than any other previous president at this meeting, Dan.
And I can't believe the fact that he's, pushing what he's almost 100 years old, I think. And what was it? His predecessor, his mentor, I suppose, lived to be, what, 101? Do these guys have special technology or something that they're using? Because all of them, whether it's the Kissingers, the Rockefellers, or Rothschilds, seem to make it up into their hundreds. I mean, every year that I do see him at Bilderberg, though, I have noticed he seems to be shrinking and slowly hunching over more and more. I don't know if you've noticed the same thing.
Well,
But
we're bringing up a
yeah, it's not
picture,
looking
and there
good
he
for
is
Kissinger.
hunching. I mean, that's what happens when you are literally. He's got to be in his late 90s at this point, and that's not to disparage old people, but there are so many people from our parents' generation, especially. Not forget about our grandparents' generation. You know, my grandparents did make it into their 80s, but at least on my mother's side. But forget about it on my parents' generation. People are dropping like flies at 40s, 50s. You're lucky if you get to 65. No one's even talking about that benchmark of 72, which is imagination land at this point. I mean, that's truly really being balanced by the number of boomers that have survived because their diet wasn't full of crap. That's a whole other issue.
Yeah.
And
Well, the scary thing about that, though, is that there's a generational shift that's about to take place when it comes to control, when it comes to power. A lot of these guys are really pushing that they're about to face death, and the next generation, who they've been training, molding, and shaping, are about to take the reins and take over that torch. And this new generation, they haven't experienced the First and Second World War like their mentors have. They're hungry and ready for this. It's their time to shine soon. So I think when we start to see the Kissingers begin to croak, and we've seen Rockefellers, and we see the Rothschilds and the Queen, all these like guys who are getting up there around 100 years old, they're all going to be dying soon in the next couple of years, and there's going to be major transitional shift of power into the new generation of power-hungry, warmongering thugs. So I think the next decade is going to be very telling, very interesting as this older generation dies off and the new power-hungry, egotistical maniacs take the reins.
Well, I got to tell you, I've got some hope for the future because you're right. A lot of these people are going to have to be dying off soon. The Queen, Prince Philip, they're well into their late 90s. I pray to God that their sons have not been groomed to be the aggressive tyrants behind the scenes that those people truly were. You know, especially with some of the information that was put out there by Dodi Al-Fayed's father, saying that he was in contact with them, that they did believe that their mother was murdered. He revealed that on a Howard Stern interview, by the way, if anybody's doubting that quote. So, you know, I hope that transitional shift is a good one. I hope Peter Thiel isn't some megalomaniacal libertarian tyrant. I hope he does have the common sense that we've seen in the public. You got to remember, this is a guy that came up with PayPal with Elon Musk. You know, the Elon Musks of the world are inheriting this. But at the same time, Bill Gates is going to be around a long time. Warren Buffett, who knows? He could be kicking for a long time. Ted Turner, another 10, 20 years, come back with a resurgence of power. Bill Clinton could step into that role. There are plenty of people to fill that void, but you do have hope when you see, Luke, right after Bilderberg, getting a sit down with one of the youngest members ever to attend. It shows that there is the chance for that positive shift, in my opinion, Dan. But I want to get to this story because this is in your neck of the woods. And I talked about it earlier this week on the Daily Drop over at Facebook that we do daily, obviously. Please tune in. It's only a 5 to 15 minute program where we go over the stories that day that you're probably not going to hear anywhere else. And I watched this thing, and to set it up for people, what we're about to watch is we've got somebody in a courthouse with 6 different police officers, constables, whatever you want to call it. Now, he's unarmed. I want to get that across. He is not armed. He's just been sentenced. Is he being unruly? Yes. Is there force necessary? Yes. Is this possibly the time that you would tase somebody? Yes. It's a possibility. I could see where this is going. If he actually had control of this officer's baton, as they're saying, maybe that's the next step. Maybe. That's still a big maybe. There's 6 of you. This kid is not a large kid. in front of his mother, Dan, and we're going to go to the video right now. We're going to play it for everybody to watch. It's very quick. But in front of his mother right now, an officer decides that it is going to be okay to use lethal force. There it is. And there it is. And it is a miracle that this person survived this, believe it or not. But we had an officer point a gun at an 18-year-old's head, fire the trigger in a courthouse in Quebec. And this is not national news. Now, if it were a black, and I hate to say this, you know what I mean? Because I'm not trying to play race politics. But if this were a black 18-year-old with his mother and this happened, this is international news.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying to myself, you know, so many times these things are being ignored when this is a police brutality issue that we all need to be aware of and not a divisive race issue. Correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need to focus on the fact that there obviously needs to be a change in the way these police officers are being trained. Or maybe the fact is that the change has already taken place and they are now not being trained in the proper manner, because when you have 6 men surrounding an 18-year-old boy and you take the decision to execute, to execute the kid, shoot him in the head. I mean, they're a bunch of cowards. They are loser cowards, because they could have subdued the kid. Like you said, if any time there is a time to use a taser, it's then. So what happened here is an absolute travesty. And yes, we need to show the people what happened, because the mainstream media is not doing it.
And, you know, in fact, you would think that this would at least be a bigger story in your neck of the woods, but before we got together, you were unaware of it. And, you know, we're seeing it on blogs here and there, but you're not seeing it front and center anywhere. Instead, again, we're dealing with the Memo, and we're dealing with all this left-right divisive politics that, again, doesn't create a change. We're not talking about foreign policy. We're not talking about police brutality issues. This is a kid that literally just took a bullet by his eyeball, and it narrowly missed his brainstem and eye socket, and amazingly is going to make a full recovery. But the only response to that the other 5 men in uniform should have made was holster your weapons and put your hands behind your back, because you're under arrest for attempted murder. And I haven't heard anything on this officer.
And like you said, you know, if he were black, things would have been different. But that goes to that's, you know, to a large extent how it is in America. Here in Canada, I would use the analogy that if he was of the Islamic faith, then they would be all over it. I guarantee it, because right now the ongoing meme they're pushing around here is so-called Islamophobia. Justin Trudeau, everybody jumps on it the moment anything happens. We had that fake hijab hoax, right? And they jumped all over it, tweeting out about we have to end Islamophobia. That wasn't even real. So if this guy happened to be of the Islamic faith, I can guarantee you the mainstream media would have been talking about this. But again, yes, the FISA memo seems to be a distraction from bigger issues. But this is a Canadian issue that needs to be discussed. People haven't heard of this, as you said. I only became aware of it when you told me about it, and yeah, that needs to change. So let's go ahead and show people exactly what happened there, because it's shocking.
It is absolutely shocking. It's one of the most shocking videos I've seen so far this year. And we're obviously in February, but it's been a long time since I've seen a police brutality. I'd say the only thing that compares is the execution of that gentleman begging for his life in the hallway from an automatic weapon. That was very difficult to watch and extremely unbelievable. And although that gentleman didn't have force, there was also only one cop. What's so unbelievable to me is, again, there were 6 of them right there. Yeah. His mother was there. This is an unarmed 18-year-old, and that's why, folks, we got to get this information out. This is why we do these type of broadcasts. And I want to thank my man, Dan Dix, for doing this broadcast with us. Couldn't do the weekly wrap-up with Luke Radowski. We got the next best thing, Press for Truth, amazing organization, an organization with integrity that doesn't go by the false left-right paradigm, no matter how in style that is. You know, this is about being the change you want to see in the world, reaching out to everybody, finding a common point so we can bring people in to the true nature of reality, and we can make that reality better for all human beings, Dan.
Absolutely, Jason. That's what it's all about. And thank you for having me. And on that note, speaking of, Luke Rudowski and the great things he's done, we're actually linking up in about a week from now in Acapulco, Mexico for the Anarcho Poco conference. And we're both teaching workshops. We're doing a We Are Change Media workshop where Luke and I are going to be teaching all the tricks of the trade, showing how it is that we do what we do, how to get a press pass, how to confront somebody like Kissinger, how to do these things. And then I'm going to be also doing my own workshop, how to press for truth, as it were, with Dan Dix. And Luke Rudowski is going to join me as a co-teacher in my course to also give you all his knowledge that he's acquired over the years of doing the things like confronting the Kissingers and the Rockefellers and these guys. You can learn directly from him and me one-on-one, basically. So it's a pretty unique opportunity coming up in just a couple of weeks at Anarchapulco. Yeah, check it out. I think that you can get tickets now at anarchapulco.com, I believe is the site. And me and Luke will be there showing you all the tricks of the trade in about a week and a half from now.
That is awesome news, and we definitely are looking forward to that one, Dan. Thank you so much, my friend, for joining me, and we will see you on the other side. Thank you all for joining.